Welcome, Karin, to the Happier at Work podcast. I'm delighted to have you on as a guest today. Would you like to introduce yourself to listeners?
Yes, thank you so much for having me as a guest today, Eva. I would love to introduce myself. So I'm Karin Tischler, and I'm the founder of Emily's Path Consulting. The goal of my company is to get to gender equality faster than it is currently projected, which is about 100 years. And the way I'm doing this is by making more people aware of flexible work. And why I do this is I believe that having more types of flexible work all around the world will increase the diversity in the workforce, and by doing this, that will then get us to gender equality faster. One big part of my company, Emily's Path Consulting, is my podcast, which is Job Sharing and Beyond. And in my podcast, I talk with international experts, business leaders, academics, and practitioners about 4 different types of topics, and they are flexible work, fathers and care, support for professionals returning back to the paid workforce, and the transferability of unpaid, the transferability of skills learned in the unpaid care setting. And my goal is, by doing these interviews, to basically make people more aware and help them understand that getting to a more flexible work environment, it requires not only to have what maybe people might think of the typical, oh, this is maybe for moms that need more flexible work. No, we really need to have flexible work available for both men and women. And in addition to that, by having more flexible work available, that allows professionals who might have been outside of the paid workforce for a long period of the time to get back more easily. And then finally, to recognize more of the skills that people have learned outside of the paid workforce. By doing that, again, it enables people to get back more easily because they can show what they have learned, instead of being, oh, somebody has done a career gap or has had a career break. It really is recognizing all the skills they have learned during that time.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. And I really, really believe in your mission. I just recently finished reading a book called Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. But in it, you know, she basically documents that the fact that there is a gender data gap, there's not enough information about women to make proper decisions. And when decisions are made without data, and predominantly by men in various fields, because typically they're the ones at those senior positions and making those decisions, the data is not, well, I was about to say is inherently flawed, but it's actually non-existent in a lot of cases. So the decisions that they're making are incorrect and they don't suit women.
And I have the book at home. I have not had a chance to read through it yet, but that is definitely an incentive now to read more through it. But I completely agree with you. Like, for example, when I started doing more research, I was trying to find out here in Canada how many women and men were actually stay-at-home parents. And to be honest, that data was actually not that easy to find. And basically what happened is I came across a Canada-wide number, which is roughly about 500,000 stay-at-home parents. But the data is actually from 2015. And then because of a project, they split it down for dads across the different provinces. So I know, for example, that here in British Columbia, there are 12,000 stay-at-home dads, again, back from the data of 2015, but I actually do not know what the number is for moms. So I couldn't, if you'd asked me, I don't actually have that number. And so it made me realize, because I emailed the statistics of Statistics Canada, and probably I was maybe the first one to email them, because it was years later, and eventually they told me if I think it was paid me then maybe say $200, they could actually run the data on a per province basis for women as well, because it exists, but they just haven't crunched the data because I guess nobody was interested. But it sort of reflected to me also like maybe the status of somebody who has been a stay-at-home parents, that it is often a very invisible part of the workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100% agree. And, it's interesting what you're saying, that the data is readily available for stay-at-home dads, but it's not readily available for stay-at-home mums. And you do wonder who made that decision to make the data readily available, and split down by province. It's very interesting. Another interesting topic that ties in as well with this, Karin, is the idea of the gender pay gap, which is getting a lot of press in Ireland because there is, so in the UK recently, they brought out gender pay gap legislation in Ireland. It's going through the government at the moment, so it's being processed. And that is very much related to how it's more about gender representation and the level within an organization that women can get to, and the fact that women tend to take lower paid jobs and part-time roles and things like that, that is stopping us as women from reaching those higher level positions. So it's very relevant what you're talking about as well in relation to flexible work and having flexibility at all levels within an organization to provide equal opportunities for both men and women.
Yeah, and to be honest, I always find it surprising because there is such a big concern everywhere in the world. How can we get women into higher positions? But at the same time, and they realize that often it is at the mid-management level that you have the leaky pipeline, and that's where women drop off. But what I feel is, once somebody decides to leave the workforce entirely, they are sort of long and forgotten, instead of like two things. Instead of realizing, if we could have a more flexible working environment, not just on a, as you said, like a maybe like an entry-level position, but on a mid to senior level position, that would truly enable professionals to return back to the workforce more easily, or not even have to opt out in the first place. And so, for example, in my podcast, I recently had on the show Esther Himmen and Katharina Winch from Germany, and their topic is top sharing. And so top sharing is basically job sharing on a management and on a expert level. And one of the statistics from the research was really interesting, that basically a lot of the people had great interest in top sharing, but the majority had never heard of that. So I think there is a lot of awareness building that still needs to be done, and there need to be role models, companies and individuals that really role model that it can be done. And my favorite example is always SAP, because SAP in Germany, for example, has made every management position as a job sharing possibility. And if, for example, somebody feels that it cannot be done, they actually have to put in I guess, I don't know if it was in writing, or at least have a conversation to explain why they don't believe that this job can't be job shared. And what was really interesting is that from all the management positions that are job shared, 43% of the job sharers are actually male. So, so I feel we need more role models. And last week, a couple of weeks ago, I attended a event online organized, among others, by the German government, and it was about, translated, success factor family. And so they were basically talking about best practice examples of how can we help working parents to succeed in organizations. And so one of the things there was that they talked about is we need to have more male role models in part-time positions, whether that is a part-time career or, you know, job sharing. Because it cannot be that it's only female, because then it goes right back to the, well, that's the mommy track. And in order to get to gender equality and to really, you know, allow everybody to, you know, work and have work-life balance, it needs to be across. And yeah, so I feel there is still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, and that's kind of one element of it, and I totally agree. Having those male role models showing this is how it's done, you know, whether it's taking extended paternity leave, and like you say, job sharing or doing part-time work, all of that kind of stuff is really important. What else is there, do you think, that we can get this balance a little bit better?
So in my mind, it's like, you know, I've been listening a lot to your previous podcast episodes, and they're really interesting. And I think a lot of the times it's sort of the cookie cutter method. But you know, some of your guests have talked about how important it is to look at individual people and to be, you know, gearing more towards their strengths. And I think that, you know, in a way you can look at what people have talked about with COVID-19, and you look at countries that have done very well and often happen to have female leaders. And one of the strengths they demonstrated was the empathy they displayed and the collaboration to, you know, be firm, but at the same empathetic about people's situations. And I think that's something that could be done in an organization more to, you know, use the strengths that obviously, you know, like, you know, if you want to stereotype, like, you know, maybe more women are empathetic. Obviously, it's not everybody, but I think to allow more different types of leaderships prevail. And one of the things, and that I will be, you know, I will have several future guests on my show, is to see how people have learned strengths of leadership by basically, you know, raising children to become future representative and respected members of society, and then using these skills to apply to their leadership and managerial position at work.
So it goes back to what you were saying about those transferable skills that people have. And even if they're out of the workplace for 5, 10, 20 years, they're actually building on a really valuable skill set that sometimes people forget about. And even the individuals themselves maybe don't recognize in themselves the skills that they have built by being a parent.
You are absolutely right. Thank you. Yes. And it's, I think, often because care work or unpaid care work does not currently get as recognized in society as paid work, people who are especially a unpaid carer for a long time lose their business confidence because the way people look at their resume is not positive. They look at it as a, oh, well, you know, this is somebody who might not have a lot of technological skills because they have been outside so long, and they don't realize that, you know, somebody, as we said, raising children and also doing voluntary work, such as maybe for a school, you know, fundraiser, going to corporations to get presents for a silent auction, to, you know, manage many volunteers to put together that fundraiser. These are, if they were paid for it, or if it was in a company setting, people would be, wow, what leadership skills. But for, you know, currently, if it is outside of the paid workforce, that is not recognized. I am always very appreciative about Melinda Gates raising in her book, The Moment of Lift, the cost of unpaid care work, where she talks about that very thing. And also Marilyn Waring, who is from New Zealand, an economist, female economist, who basically made the world realize that we need to really count unpaid care work, that our entire economic system is only, you know, set up on paid work rather than on all the voluntary and unpaid care work. So yeah,
that's you're really going to love Invisible Women, because that's something that she addresses that issue as well, in relation to unpaid care work, whether that is caring for elderly parents, caring for children, voluntary work that's done. And women tend to take the bulk of that type of work, which is something that never really occurred to me before, but now I see it a lot with friends and with colleagues and things like that. But she does address that and says how, if you counted that towards the GDP of a country, it would dramatically alter things in terms of how things are counted, but it would also put a higher value on that work. And if that work were to be subsidized in some way, say by the government, you know, in a more formalized way, in a more equitable way, that it would give women much more economic power, and it would boost the economy as well, because women would have more money and they would spend money then within the economy. So it was an interesting take that she had on it.
Yes, I will definitely read the book. And you know, one thing I also wanted to say, as we are talking about women and men, I think one of the big things that has brought COVID out is that more men have been exposed to the unpaid care work and how much it actually takes. Because I think often, if, say, a man was working from an office and had maybe a stay-at-home wife, they all of a sudden become, you know, realize how much effort it takes. But also when you have a couple with two people working, it all of a sudden had to be much more of a balancing act, who was going to do what. And so, for example, at the conference in Germany, what came out is that many more men than before asked their respective employer to work differently because of raising children. So while, for example, there is a McKinsey and Lean In report that recently came out that basically said that 1 in 4 women in the US are contemplating to opt out of the paid workforce because of COVID, I would say the silver lining is that overall, there have been multiple studies that men are doing more unpaid care work, and also that secret parenting is becoming far less, the norm, because all of a sudden, like I'm sure you remember the BBC professor, who had his interview, and these two little kids came in. I've forgotten, it was 1 or 2 years ago, and it was this big deal, right? But nowadays you have Zoom calls, and there are dogs, cats, little kids coming in, and both when mothers as well as fathers are on the Zoom call. So I really feel it normalizes the person that before it was maybe this artificial, you are one person at work, and then you're the private person, and all of a sudden with COVID it becomes more, it's the human being, the family person, and I think it honestly feel it makes it people more authentic, and
no, absolutely, totally agree. And I was on a conference myself earlier today, and in it, like a lot of the themes that were coming up were around workplace well-being, and if a leader admits to having had mental health difficulties during COVID, that it makes it okay for other people to admit those things as well. So kind of it touches on that role model example that you had earlier, and everything really centered around being more vulnerable and showing your human side at work. And it could be the case then that COVID has accelerated this in a lot of cases. It is disappointing to hear, and it's not the first time I've heard that 25% of the workforce are thinking of leaving because it's so difficult to manage both at the same time. And perhaps that was during the summer or when things were a bit more fraught, where the kids were still at home. I know certainly in Ireland at the moment, kids are back in school, and there's no real sign of them not kind of being taken out of school anytime soon. There's isolated cases where suspected COVID and the class can't come to school and things like that. But for the most part, most people's children are at school, and the majority of people are still working from home at the moment, again, except in some exceptional cases. It's maybe that's kind of given a renewed sense of being able to cope and being able to work at home. But I mean, the other issue, I suppose, is the space that people work from, and finding that space at home, and sleeping where you work as well, which is quite an awkward thing to do, I think, and it makes it much more difficult to switch off at the end of the day. And aside from the great strain of being in the middle of a pandemic, it's being at home while you're working, and sleeping in the same place that you work causes a lot of mental strain as well.
Yes, I definitely can see that, especially I imagine if you are, like, say, in a downtown area of big towns, right, where space is at a premium, and you just don't have that much, different rooms or also availability, especially, if it's really a lockdown and you're unable to actually go anywhere. And it's interesting to hear that you're saying in Ireland the children are back in school, because it seems like, as I'm German, so I'm hearing that in Germany it's starting to start to cut back down, and that kids are probably soon going to be at least temporarily out of the school system in some areas. And here in Canada, we've had the option that some the kids could stay at home or go to school. But I think, just to come back to the flexible aspect of work, in the past, it seemed to me from all the research I have done that in Europe, flexible working has been accepted for a much longer time, and whether that is on a job sharing basis or part-time basis, versus in North America, I always felt, and I had my kids when in the US when they were very little, and it was always these all or nothing, and I felt it, even as like a year or two ago, it still was very much, it's that work culture of 40 hours is like the minimum, so to speak. And I always felt that flexible working was just not really an option. And because of the lack of childcare, I really feel, and the fact that so many women in particular have considered or have actually left, positions of like mid-management and higher, that some organizations are really starting to decide we need to do more about it. We need to, offer more flexible types of arrangements. And so I definitely see that as a silver lining. And the other thing, as we were talking about, like people being stuck at home more. So again, I'm going to use SAP as my favorite example. So they have, for example, recently been awarded the number 12th position in the world's best places to work. And I completely, congratulate them and agree with this, because they've done an amazing job during COVID. Because what I realized is that whilst many people have families around them, there are also many of their employees that are by themselves, and they were starting to feel lonely. And so they actually started to create methods to help them by having an app, that sort of Tinder-like app, which allowed the employees to find lunch partners. So they had Zoom lunches. They've also had like a online barbecue, which had more than 1,000 people attending. And that really was to focus on the employees. And your previous guests have talked about the importance of, maybe before it was all about shareholder value, but now they are coming to the realization that at the end of the day, we have to have happy employees, which then leads to happy customers. And I would say SAP Undercover sees HR leadership in Germany really has focused on the happy employees. And they have, like, besides COVID, they have a father network where, again, it allows dads to, talk among themselves what it is like to be a dad, to get support. They have keep in touch days for parents that are outside of work during parental leave to come with their baby to work for a day. I think it's every 3 months, to kind of catch up on the latest business news. They have some, seminars about caregiving. So they really, they have mindfulness training. So there is a lot of things that they are trying to offer their employees, and not surprisingly, their turnover rate is extremely low in the industry. And so I feel the more we have role models like SAP in the world, the more we can have, going back to the unpaid professionals, can allow them to come back under their terms with more flexibility, but also support in the needs they may have.
Yeah, you've picked up on a few interesting areas there. Excuse me. So the first one, I didn't, or at least it never really occurred to me that there is a big difference between flexible working in the States and Ireland. I always understood North America as being very, the heavy work culture, and certainly in Ireland it's sort of minimum of 20 days holidays, and that's at a minimum. Most places might be 25 going up to 30 or 35. And that seems to be the norm. And it would be different, as you know yourself, across different countries in Europe then as well. I think France has quite a lot. Plus we have additional public holidays as well, which is great. But it's interesting to understand more about that perspective. And I suppose it's not surprising then that women sort of fall out of the workplace if flexible working is not supported after they've had kids. I like this idea of the keeping in touch days. We have those certainly here, but a little bit more informally, where it's normally the mum who, she's on maternity leave for 6 months, 9 months, a year, and she would come back into the office and with the baby, but just informally, really. I like the idea of that more formalized approach to catch up on what's actually been going on. And the idea of seminars about caregiving as well, really like that. And SAP sounds like a great place to work, and it sounds,
yes.
And you're so right. It's not just about having role models within organizations. It's about having those role models globally to show this is what a good company looks like. And it's no surprise then, I'm sure a lot of people want to work there. I mean, by the sounds of it, it does sound like a really great place to work. And this Tinder-like app for Zoom lunches, because one of the challenges that came up on the HR leader session that I attended earlier was how to create that water cooler chat, how to create that informal kind of work chat that you just get to when you're in the office, where you just bump into someone, you have some small talk, but then it turns to business, but it's only in passing. It's not a formal thing. Whereas that's like one of the big concerns is that's completely gone away now. So how do you recreate that in the Zoom world, in the Zoom setting? So I really like the idea of that Tinder-like app. So you match with someone who you would normally never meet. And this is another huge benefit of working from home and having access to Zoom, is the idea of being able to network with people from everywhere in the world. And on the one hand, you have people who are finding it a struggle and feel a bit more isolated. On the other hand, I get the impression that there's a lot more balance in terms of the meetings. So there's not necessarily one person taking over and dominating the meeting, because it's on Zoom now and you can see everyone and you can see when someone wants to say something. And there's also a much more inclusive environment as well, I suppose. And the idea of just being able to connect with people and just being able to work with people that you would never normally work with on a day-to-day basis, I think is incredible. And it just shows what can be done in this age of the internet, which we've had for a long time now.
Yes. Just to talk a few of your points. So SAP, they work with an organization named Tandemploy. And so Tandemploy is a software company. And so they were first known because they were creating job sharing matching within organizations, and they have since expanded. And so that was the lunch app that's with the help of Tandemploy. And I just I find that amazing that can be done like this now. And what you were referring to, like feeling the world becomes smaller because all of a sudden we are able to talk to people because events are happening now online that otherwise would have been locally, and we would have never been able to travel to. And we talked earlier that you have attended some meetings in North America online, and the same for me, the other way round. I would feel over the last 7 months, I have probably met more people in Germany in particular, but also elsewhere in the world than ever before. And because I think it puts everybody on a level field, there is much more of like an icebreaker networking kind of atmosphere than it was before. And I think in a way it helps also, I'm hoping, in the future when people would like to or try to return back to paid work, that because before I felt it was sort of from a psychological point of view, that locational distance, right? Everybody was physically in an office building and here was somebody at home. And now everybody is at home, and it is no longer, I would say, as much of a stigma. And, people have to be much more onboarded going back into a office building, but in some cases, as we've learned, going back to work in an office building might never be the case again, or maybe in a different format where it is maybe more for social gatherings, and the normal work is going to be at home. And like there might be a reduction in business travel, and all of this ultimately will help gender equality, because then all of a sudden, women might be able to apply for positions, because it doesn't involve all of a sudden that much traveling or rearrangement of, to make things happen. And like the other thing is, literally yesterday, I learned about, in a more traditional industry such as law, in Germany, there are two people sharing a law partner role on a top sharing basis. So I'm starting to learn more and more, and it was literally around 3 connections, all done online. And I sort of feel being able to connect further through COVID has really helped to spread more awareness of many things. Like I attended a meeting in Australia where one of my podcast guests is trying to raise more awareness of paternity leave and to expand it. And 8 or 9 months ago, it would have been in person, and I might not have been aware of it. So I feel, to me, there are many positive things that coming out of Corona, like on a silver lining. And in Germany, even there is an initiative that has been founded called Corona-Narrative, and it's focusing on making positive statements that get put out on Twitter and other places. What has it done in a positive way? So it's not always it's the worst. I mean, clearly it has impacted negatively many people around the world, but by the same token, the innovation and I think the collaboration and the focus on more authenticity through COVID, in my mind, is hopefully getting us faster to gender equality.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. Is there anything else that you want to say about job sharing, or any other kind of anything else that you would like to share?
I think what would be important for anybody who has listened to it, there are little things that can be done that will make a tremendous difference. So whether somebody is on Zoom calls now or in an office building, instead of saying, I'm leaving now, if they have to say, pick up their children, attend a soccer game, say it out loud. Say, I am now leaving because I am doing, something with my children. I attended yesterday an academic event, and at the end, the organizer said, our guest speaker has to leave because he has an important appointment. It was that he was cooking dinner for his family. And I just, honestly, that to me, that was such a great role model. So I feel that is really important. And the other thing is really also when somebody comes back from paternity leave, parental leave or paternity leave, to ask that person, what have you learned? What skills do you feel you now possess that you would not have had it if you hadn't been on parental or paternity leave?
I really like that approach. What did you learn? Because certainly people learn something about, whether it's about themselves or learned a new skill.
Exactly.
Great. Karin, the question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast, what makes you happier at work?
What makes me happy at work? I've been thinking about that question. To me, I love research. And one of the things I also really love is to connect people with each other and being able to be authentic. And to me, that's with Zoom calls has really helped to get people to be more real. And so,
Brilliant. And if people want to reach out, what's the best way they can get in touch with you? And obviously, you can talk about your podcast as well, which you mentioned earlier.
Thank you. Yes. So if anybody wants to get in touch with me, the best way is to go to my website, which is emilyspath.ca. So that's EMILYSPATH.ca. And there you can find all the previous episodes with the show notes, as well as my Emily's Path Consulting newsletter, where you can also subscribe to it. And I'm also on LinkedIn and Instagram and Twitter.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today, Karin. It was really great having a chat with you today.
Thank you so much, Eva, for having me on your show. I really, really enjoyed it.